Welcome back, everyone. I'm so glad you're joining me for this explainer today, because we're looking at something absolutely mind-blowing, one of the most high-stakes medical achievements in human history. We're talking about the mechanical and biological roller coaster of a heart transplant. It's a situation where a literal ticking clock makes the difference between life and death. We're going to break down exactly how this intense operation actually works, step by crucial step. I mean, think about this for a second. Your heart is an absolute powerhouse. It's beating over 100,000 times a day, every single day. And in just 1 minute, it's pumping more than 5 liters of blood through your whole body. That's a massive workload. But here's the kicker. Unlike a scraped knee or a broken bone that kind of just knits itself back together, the human heart has a surprisingly limited ability to repair itself after severe damage. So when this relentless, nonstop engine starts failing, there's often really only one option left on the table: replacing the whole thing. Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. First, we'll look at finding the perfect match. Then, the race against time. After that, the surgical procedure. And finally, life after surgery. Section 1, the perfect match, finding the biological fit. So this very first hurdle, it is incredibly intense. Doctors have to rigorously screen potential recipients just to make sure they're actually healthy enough to survive such a massive trauma. They're specifically hunting for immunocompromising illnesses, basically anything that could tank the patient's chances of survival. And then on the flip side, you have the donors. Now, donors are usually patients who are tragically comatose with zero chance of resuscitation or victims of a sudden fatal event. But even with a perfectly healthy donor heart, surgeons can't just take it. Harvesting the organ strictly requires formal legal organ donor registration or explicit consent from the family. But even when you do get that legal green light, you're faced with this massive biological puzzle. A surgeon can't just take any heart and put it in any patient. It just doesn't work that way. The recipient's immune system is literally hardwired to attack foreign organisms, and to the body, a new heart is a massive foreign invader. So to stop the body from immediately destroying the new organ, doctors have to match two absolutely crucial things: blood type and antigens. If and only if they can lock down that complex biological match, well, then the surgery can actually get underway. Section 2, the race against time. The clock starts now. All right, the moment that donor heart is cleared, the extraction team goes into overdrive. First up, the organ is immediately immersed in an ice slush. Next, they inject a specialized cardiac arrest solution. Basically, this completely stops the heart from pumping so it can be extracted cleanly and, more importantly, safely. Finally, the surgeons pack the newly freed organ into a cold mixture of saline and preservation solution. And here's where the clock officially starts ticking. The split second that heart is cut off from its blood supply, it starts facing what's called ischemic damage. Because those heart cells are suddenly starved of oxygen, they start taking on irreversible damage. Honestly, this organ is only going to stay viable outside the human body for a few short hours. That is it. So it becomes this absolute high-speed, high-stakes race to transport that heart to the recipient as fast as humanly possible. Section 3, the surgical procedure, the mechanical swap. Meanwhile, the recipient is put under general anesthesia, and the surgeon performs a sternotomy. This is an incision straight down the center of the chest. They literally have to cut through the breastbone to separate the ribcage and expose that failing heart. It's a highly invasive, extremely intense step, but it's absolutely necessary to set the stage for this mechanical swap. Which brings up a pretty wild question. How on earth do you keep a patient alive when you're taking out their primary pump? Well, you use this incredible piece of tech, the cardiopulmonary bypass machine. This machine steps up and literally acts as the patient's heart and lungs. It generates all the force needed to continuously push oxygenated blood through the circulatory system. It keeps them alive so the surgical team can completely remove the damaged organ from the chest cavity. With the old heart out, the new one comes in. This quote really hits the nail on the head. It's an incredibly precise process where each blood vessel and artery must be meticulously attached to avoid leaks. This is called surgical anastomosis. There is quite literally zero room for error here. A single tiny leak could be fatal. Sewing it all together can easily take several hours, and actually, it can take even longer if the surgeon has to carefully navigate around scar tissue from the patient's previous surgeries. And then, we reach what has to be the absolute most suspenseful moment in the entire operating room. The mechanical swap is done, and it's time to reboot the system. They turn off the bypass machine and let the warm blood rush back into the aorta. Then,
Everyone just watches and waits. The whole medical team is staring at that new heart, monitoring it closely to see if it wakes up and starts beating on its own. Only after they are 100% sure it's pumping effectively do they finally sew the patient back up.
Section 4. Life after surgery. The biological aftermath.
Now, what's really fascinating and challenging about this phase is something called autonomic denervation. Surgeons are literal lifesavers, but they can't magically wire the new heart directly into the recipient's nervous system. The body has to do that on its own, and innervation can take years. Because of this nervous system disconnect, patients end up living with a much higher resting heart rate, an increased risk of stroke, and a really sluggish, difficult exercise response that requires a lot of careful, ongoing management. And then you have what I like to call the immune system tightrope. Since finding a truly flawlessly perfect match is basically impossible, the recipient's body is always going to have some level of immune reaction against the new heart. So to survive, patients have to go on lifelong, heavy-duty immunosuppressive drugs, but man, that permanent suppression comes with some severe clinical trade-offs. Certain drugs like calcineurin inhibitors can be highly nephrotoxic, meaning toxic to the kidneys, and diabetogenic. On top of that, steroids like prednisone can trigger metabolic syndrome. Plus, holding the immune system back leaves the patient dangerously vulnerable to severe infections, various cancers, and a silent chronic rejection process that slowly narrows the coronary arteries, known as cardiac allograft vasculopathy. It is a grueling, everyday balancing act. So the crucial point we need to take away here is this. Despite the rigorous pre-op screening, that terrifying race against ischemic damage, the incredibly invasive surgery itself, and all those lifelong drug side effects, the end results are honestly miraculous. Just look at the long-term survival rates. Around 70% of heart transplant recipients live for at least 5 years post-op, and over 20% go on to live another 20 years or more. When this procedure works, it is an undeniable life-saving triumph.
But we do have to step back and look at the harder reality here. We've seen the miracle of how it works, but there are still thousands of people sitting on waiting lists at this very moment. Between the complex legal red tape around organ donation and the tragic lack of access to this kind of surgery in developing nations, the demand just vastly outweighs the supply. So what happens to the thousands who never find that perfect match before their ticking clock finally runs out? It's a pretty heavy, profound question hanging over this incredible, high-stakes world of organ transplantation. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next